a copy of the minutes of the last COB meeting electronically. We also have copies here as well. Is anyone requesting additional time, or do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Thank you, Chief Turner. Anyone second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper and Ms. Ross. With that, any focused discussion? Anyone have any thoughts or comments, revisions to add or ask? If not,
on the minutes.
on the minutes, yes.
There are a couple things that I noticed going through.
No problem.
Over on the top of the second page, in that first paragraph, third line, it said Dr. Hildreth committed. I think that was probably commented.
Second page?
Second
Okay,
page.
thank you. I'm looking on the wrong page here.
Right.
Oh, got it. Okay, thank you. Comments?
And over on page 3, under the subcommittee updates, and B, MOU task force, and that indented paragraph, third line from the bottom, it says member Lou seconded. I presume that's Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Anything else?
We have one more. Over on page 3, first line, it says a motion was giving that the board staff will go by the standard set of rules. I think that was probably a motion was made.
Made.
And standard set should be the draft rules.
This is page 3,
Page 3 at the top, first line.
first line.
Staff rules.
Yeah, because the draft rules.
You have those all notated on your version?
I have it highlighted.
Highlight? Okay.
I can
So
pass
could
it
you-
over.
No, that's great. I was going to say if you could connect here,
Sure.
that would be fantastic.
And then just
Sure.
one more,
Okay.
just after adjournment, the first line after that said that Dr. Lewis gave a motion. I presume that's made a motion.
Okay, great.
Just those couple things.
Thank you. Mr. Martinez, anything?
No, I was just pointing out.
Same thing. Okay, thank you. Fantastic. So with that, we have that's just for minor revisions there. So do we, go ahead, Ms. Ross, yeah.
Well, that move that the minutes be accepted again
But with corrections.
with the corrections.
With the corrections. Thank you, Chief Turner. Anyone second?
Was noted, yeah.
Ms. Ross?
I second.
All those in favor, please say aye. Opposed? Abstentions? The motion passes. Thank you. We will, and I'm going to move directly into the chair remarks. We convened the executive committee meeting just a few days ago on Monday. I don't know that we have, Mr. Cooper, are we ready for that?
In terms of
As far as the minutes, because it was so short.
Yeah.
So we'll share that the next meeting. I am actually just going to go through highlights of that space, and actually, quite frankly, the reason why the agenda was revised was based on the communication and conversation in the executive committee. So much of that is just going to come out in the meeting. Much of that, honestly, is just decisions the board needs to make and things we want to put in front of the board for decision. I have to pause, and you'll see here we're going to talk about the COB media policy. I want to communicate to the board that you may not have seen officially through our official channels by way of email, but the board did issue a statement restating, quite frankly, our purpose, our central focus and energy in existing in this community. Not anything that we haven't talked about. I just simply want to make sure that everyone on the board is aware. If you haven't seen it, we will send it out to everyone. But in short form, we wanted to make sure that the community knew that we were ready and positioned to respond over the holiday weekend to the video that was presented to the public and that currently is under review and investigation by our staff. I will stop from sharing anything beyond that because, quite frankly, I know nothing beyond that. It is important that as a board we remain impartial, that we allow our staff, our duly appointed and positioned staff, to do their job. And I appreciate the board adhering to our bylaws and our rules by sharing all media requests to me as the chair so that I can work with Mr. Whedon to ensure that we have one voice and one purpose here. If there's ever any question or confusion or cause for conversation, I'm always available. The timing of this allowed us to realize the importance of knowing where I am as a chair at all times, even in vacation spaces, and that of Mr. Whedon as well. And so I'll pause there. Mr. Cooper, did you have something, or were you just turned
No,
around?
actually, my
Was already turned around? Okay.
so I was putting it back.
But yeah, we'll talk more about that, at least in the media policy portion of it. I just simply wanted to commend the board for coming together. I know we quickly wanted to make sure we adhered to the laws that don't allow us to talk to one another, but that we shared immediately with our executive director the importance of ensuring our staff was aware of this and moved quickly. I also want to point out that we discussed the importance of the trainings. Mr. Sweeney, thank you for raising this for our awareness here on our bylaws and our rules, just to ensure we're all familiar with it. In the last meeting, we talked about the 14 weeks of training that the Metro Police Department is offering each week. And we just realized that it's going to be virtually impossible to find a day every week that works for everyone. And so Ms. Hildreth connected with Mrs. Fitchard on the CEO, our deputy director, to find a way to hopefully condense those learnings so that we get everything we need out of it, but can do it in a condensed, shortened space of time. And we proposed the idea of having a mid-September COB retreat, where we would perhaps come in on a Saturday from 9 to 2, or we'll make sure that folks are fed and have sustenance, so that we can do the business of being ready to do our COB jobs. And so I pause for conversation and comments there if folks have thoughts on that. I believe later in the meeting here, we will hear a report from Ms. Hildreth, who has left this for us to consider. But I think that's the best way to preserve people's times, so that we do not find ourselves just canceling left and right when people are unable to make Saturday meetings. Other than that, there's not much that I've been up to other than what has been already shared out to the board. There's been quite a few media requests, and I have deferred all those to Mr. Whedon. I just don't think that it's appropriate as the chair that I speak on a matter when clearly we as a board should not have an opinion on anything until the investigation has been completed, and that is for all investigations that are occurring right now. And so it's highly unlikely you see my face anywhere connected to this, and that won't change, to be honest with you. Any comments or thoughts or questions before we move on to the fines and fees, please? No? Okay, thank you. For the fines and fees technical assistance grant meeting, that was really for Mr. Holloway because he's been attending that, so I'll move that to the August meeting, and we can look for an update from him on that from there. The NYU workshop on police and community engagement, we now have a completed report. Dr. Lewis is bringing that with us, so we'll hold for now and come back to that. On the COB media policy, we'll arrive quickly to this. So over the course of the last couple of weeks, it was raised with me and then brought to my attention again, just the need for us to have a very clear and outlined media policy, whether that is, and that's beyond just the chair and the executive director speaking on behalf of the board, but also communication by way of social media, our requests by press release, and we realize also we can't do that just within the board, the 11 of us. We need to engage our community liaison who will be coming on board and make sure that we have comms experts and a part of this as well. All of this, of course, will be brought back to the board. But before we get ahead of ourselves, I just want to open it up to the board for volunteers that might want to participate. The community liaison person will come on. I think I want to say person because Mr. Whedon's going to introduce that person. Will be a part of this. Mr. Campbell Gooch has volunteered to participate as well due to his extensive engagement in the community. And then I'd like for there to be at least a third person on this committee, or this task force rather, to ensure that we have an eye on the comms space, comms lens of all of this. So, and other components of this as well, if you have interest. So, let me pause there. Is anyone interested at all to participate? Mr. Martinez?
What do you mean by participating?
Well, and Mr. Campbell Gooch has some ideas on this as well. But the good thing is that our community liaison has a journalist. She's a journalist, right? She's worked, I believe, at Tennessee and other spaces like that. We really want to have some guidelines around, let's say, something happens on a Thursday afternoon and they ask for a response or a statement by the chair. Beyond the chair just issuing a statement, what components of the board, if anyone at all, would be participating in that? Who else within the COB needs to review those statements? When I put that statement together, I did pull in Mrs. Fitchard, as well as Mr. Pinckney for a legal review, but it certainly needs to be, I think, a lot more formalized than what I, created in that moment. So that's really what we have in mind.
Okay. I can volunteer to help out.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. It'd be great. So the three of you and Mr. Campbell Gooch, we can connect you. And actually, Mr. Whedon said that once our new person begins on August 5th. So that allows us at least 3 weeks for the three of you to get together for that meeting and to have an offering for the board in our August meeting. Thank you. The subcommittee update. I'd like to pause there and give the floor. Well, actually, who will be leading us in this MOU task force space? Mr. Sweeney? Thank you. I will yield to you here.
Thank you. First, if I could give an update regarding the draft rules for a second. And we were tasked to establish the method for community engagement regarding the rules. And we have done that. We prepared a memo that would explain what we have done so far and how we came up with the draft rules that are under consideration. We identified 21 different organizations to receive information regarding the draft rules, and we sent it out to them as well as sending it to the Chief of Police. Committee members are then in the process of having followed up with the various groups. We've asked them to consider responding in two different ways, written comments, and then we have scheduled a community meeting forum for August 6th, where we've invited the organizations to speak as well with a designated representative for up to 5 minutes each. So that's going to be held in the Sunny West Conference Room at the Howard School Building. And then after we receive, I'm sorry.
What time?
I didn't say. 6 to 8.
Okay.
And then after we receive the written information and have that forum, this committee will meet again, and we will consider that information, and then we'll make whatever revisions to the rules we find to be appropriate. And then we will bring the final draft of the rules back here to the board at our August board meeting. Okay?
That's great.
Any
Thank you.
questions about the oh, and everybody's invited. Okay? Any other board members to come are certainly invited, but this will be a committee meeting where we've invited everybody to come.
Thank you. Mr. Sweeney, can we acknowledge Ms. Ross before you move forward? I think she has a question.
Mr. Whedon, what kind of response have we received?
So far, we've received 2 responses from the mailing, 2 positive responses.
And what we've asked in the memo that went out was particularly, are there issues that we didn't address that we should address? Or have we addressed issues in a way that people think misses the point or missed something crucial? That's kind of the primary focus that we've asked in the written materials that we sent out.
Thank you.
Okay? All right. And then on the MOU, We have now completed our work on the MOU as far as it being appropriate for consideration by the board, as far as approving it again to go out to public comment. It's important to recognize that this document is different from the draft rules in the sense that it is our proposal that we will be making to the police department. Okay? So it's focused from the standpoint of what we want to be able to secure, the type of relationship that we want to secure with the police department, but it will be negotiated with the police department once it's presented. The committee has met 4 times with Director Whedon in this drafting process. Prior to our discussions, Director Whedon and Ms. Ross met with Chief Anderson and met with Kathy Moranti, the head of OPA, in order to discuss this relationship that we envision. The result of that was they said, well, put it in writing. Whatever it is you want, put it in writing. So then Director Whedon prepared an initial draft based upon basically OPA kind of rules and guidelines, and with information from another city that was, similarly situated to us. The committee then met and we worked through those in our 4 meetings that we had. The proposal that we present to you, there's a couple particular things that you want to note as we go through the discussions. The first one in the definition section, where we define employees and police officers. One thing that we have discovered in the process of working on this is there are officers in Nashville that are known as special police officers. And special police officers are those officers who are not employed by Metro, but who have Metro jurisdiction, which is granted by the chief of police, by both ordinance and state statute. And they're subject to the authority of the chief of police, and they have written, limited, defined police powers. An example of it is Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt police officers are not confined to the campus. They have general police power authority in certain areas during certain hours, so long as the officers are on duty and all that. So we have included special police officers within the definition of employees and police officers to bring it under this proposal. And we are checking to see what other special police officers exist in the county. And so anyone who is a special police officer will fall under this same matter. So that's one thing that's a little different than we originally saw as we started the process. The next thing to focus on is jurisdiction. Under the charter, we have broad jurisdiction over matters concerning violation of rules and laws as to civil right and criminal actions. The question is, how will these 2 organizations, meaning us and the police department, particularly OPA, work together? There are a couple different ways that could happen. Okay? It could be that both kind of ignores the other and just does their jobs. Okay? And if you did that, you would end up with 2 different investigations going at the same time, uncoordinated, maybe involving the same people, maybe not, maybe reaching the same conclusions, maybe not. You could have one where you would have a joint investigation of matters, where everything would be done together by us and by the police department at the same time. That raises certain issues as to whether or not one side or the other feels that they lose any of their authority or legitimacy by doing that, and whether or not it would encourage or discourage people to participate in the process. The third is to agree to some kind of allocation of the investigative responsibility. And that's what we propose here. And so we propose that as to those matters that involve the public, whether a complaint is made by the public or whether it's made by others as to the public, that those would be matters that would be handled by the COD. And the other matters would be handled by OPA. That really seems to be the best way to do it, because if you don't do it that way, then what's supposed to be the result of what we're doing will probably be rendered ineffective. Meaning that if we have investigated and we make a recommendation, but in the meantime, OPA has already investigated and made a determination, then our recommendation might not be received, or might not be received well, because they say, gee, we've already done it, thank you. And so it seems like the best way is to figure out a way of kind of divided responsibilities. And that's what we propose here. And then the other matters, records and information, that's kind of the sharing of information. A lot of the information that we're going to need is going to be in the possession of the police department. And we have to make an arrangement to not only obtain that information, but to obtain that information timely. And so,
is this on the, sorry, so I want to make sure I'm following.
yes, that one is in 4, Roman numeral 4.
Okay.
Page 2.
Page 2, okay, gotcha. Thank you, okay.
Okay. On records and information, we divided it up into 3 different classes. Basically, kind of the governing documents that we will always have access to and have to immediately. Other types of information that we will have regular access to essentially immediately, but on 24-hour notice, basically. And then a third general category of information that could cover a whole lot of different things, and so we just said that that would be negotiated and promptly provided.
Gotcha.
Okay. One other thing that's significant, that's a little bit different, is an administrative leave provision. There's a provision in the police manual now by which the chief of police can put somebody on administrative leave, desk duty, where there's some certain concern, like what has happened in this most recent incident. The chief has put that person on that administrative leave. This provision says that that request can be initiated by the director. If during our investigation we determine that there's that type of situation, that he can then bring that to the police department, to the chief, to trigger that review, which then the department decides yay or nay, but will advise us immediately as to what they've done and why. And then there's some call-out procedures that has to do with our right to be at the scene of an incident in certain classes, and we would get notification of those and the right to be present for those. And then there are other provisions in there, such as the training provisions. That highlights all kind of key provisions. We did leave a couple provisions blank for time on purpose, because we figured that time would get negotiated.
Let's see where it is. It was supposed to be in line.
There it is. It's over on page 4. And this is as to mediation and restorative justice programs.
C2.
And that's C2 and C3, where we're still developing the written policies regarding the mediation and restorative justice programs. I guess one other thing that I should note is that with the exception of 3 types of matters, any complaint that has been made can be resolved by mediation or another restorative justice program. the three classes of cases that cannot be resolved in that way are allegations of the use of excessive force, allegations of actions that result in serious bodily injury or resulting in custody death. Those three cannot be resolved other than through a complete investigation. In the other matters, you can have mediation or restorative justice without any investigation or anywhere in the middle of the process. But if they're undertaken, then the investigation stops, at least temporarily, to see if the matter resolves out that way. And if it does resolve out, then the investigation is ended.
And it's there, will there be, or and I'm reviewing here with you, but will the board, in a situation like that, would the board still be, will we be notified of such, right? So that, X has been, investigation has been
Yes,
concluded?
it's not in here because this is the negotiation with the police department.
Right.
But the executive director should be giving us notice of everything that's going on.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Okay?
Thank you.
So with that explanation, we're glad to answer any questions that anybody has.
Your turn.
Okay. Let me go back to the special police.
Yes.
It was my understanding that the only organization that was granted special police powers was Vanderbilt University. And their jurisdiction is clearly defined in the MOU. Now, I know there was an original MOU, and I'm sure that it's been updated over the last few years, but I'm not aware of any other situations where there are special police powers granted by the chief. Now, I know there are police powers or security guard powers that are granted by the state through the Department of Commerce and Insurance. But I'm not aware of anything that was granted by the police department. Now, that may have changed. The other thing on page 4, item 2, if within blank days of a written notice and information being provided by both parties except participate in the voluntary remedial process that will be undertaken. What kind of timeline are we suggesting there, or is there a timeline?
We couldn't come up.
We figured that would be a matter of discussion
Okay.
as we're going through the negotiation to figure out what's practical, trying to keep everything on a timely basis.
Do you have a recommendation, Chief?
Well, yeah, my suggestion would be 14 days.
Okay.
And the other thing I wanted to bring to the attention of the board on the memorandum of understanding is on page 5, item A, where it says policy advisory, and the last line, which gives the chief, I believe, 60 days to respond. I would suggest that be cut to 30 days.
Okay?
I think 30 days would be a sufficient amount of time.
All right.
So,
Thank you. Ms. Ross?
Oh, in terms of item, the one about the special police, so far, we did get the updated MOU. Our attorney obtained it, and he's presently looking to see if any other departments are commissioned for special police duties.
Great. So it's
So that's an ongoing information gathering.
okay. Mr. Pinckney, anything to add?
I've sent out an email to counsel for MNPD, but I have not heard anything back. I don't believe she's been in the office this week.
Thank you. Mr. Cooper?
Mr. Sweeney, a couple of questions. In discussing the jurisdiction section, you described 3 possible scenarios that the committee looked at.
Yes.
The Charter Amendment 11.1302.1 says that the board has the option of establishing a monitoring program that provides an ongoing review or audit of the complaint process administered by the MNPD Office of Professional Accountability or equivalent internal affairs program. Would that be a fourth model, or is that something that y'all also looked at?
That's something different.
Okay.
That's monitoring what the OPA actually does.
All right.
Okay, and that's just kind of totally separate and apart.
So you would see that as something in addition to what we're talking about here?
Something, yes, in addition, but not necessary at the moment. And if we're able to arrange this allocation of authority, it might not be necessary.
Okay, my other question on the administrative leave proposal,
Yes.
would that administrative leave recommendation fall within the definition of recommended discipline?
No,
Okay, why not?
because it's a, I don't, as I understand it from the OPA side, they don't view it as discipline.
Okay,
Okay, that it's a temporary status. The person still gets paid the same amount that they're getting paid.
all right. So I guess that's my question. If it is disciplinary, then my question would be, would 13022, which says the board has to make that recommendation, would that be a delegable power that we could give to our executive director, or is that something we would have to recommend?
I guess that's a question, but here, we're not, I guess the best way to describe what we're doing is we're just asking the chief to do what he already has authority to do, that he could do without any recommendation from us.
Of course, that's true of many things he could do without our recommendation.
Maybe, but I mean, all we have done is taken his authority that's currently in their rules and provided another means by which to bring a matter to his attention, and then put a response provision to it. But we did have discussions, Director Reed and I, as we're going through this, whether or not this was something that the board had to do versus whether the director could do. And we resolved it out that he could, but that's an open issue.
Okay, fair enough. And certainly if the police department does not consider it disciplinary, then it would not appear to be a problem.
And that can get fleshed out more as we go through the negotiation process on the OPA.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Anyone else? Ms. March, I know I'm not looking hard to my left, but I'm going to continue to look left. Mr. Sweeney, what would be our next steps here?
This would be a motion to the board to tentatively approve the MOU with the, amending it with the recommendations made by Chief Turner as to both the 30 days and the 14 days. And to tentatively approve it for the purpose of soliciting community input. One thing in that regard I'd like to discuss just before we get to a motion is when we met last time, I was late, and I apologize for having been late, but when I was reading through the minutes, for part that I missed, there was discussion about having a task force to consider the MOU. We think that it would probably be best to request community review of the MOU the same way we're doing for the rules, which is not with a task force, but instead sending out the draft and then asking for a written response and then having a public forum on it. One of the reasons why is because the soliciting of information is also soliciting information from the police department. And putting them on a task force when we're going to be negotiating with them later is kind of a mixed sort of process. And therefore we think that the process that we're using for the rules probably works best for consideration of the MOU as well. So we would suggest that we do that rather than have the task force.
In our last meeting, I'm checking the notes here so that I'm clear, but I don't believe that did we actually vote to, or did we just discuss it?
I couldn't tell from the minutes.
Yeah, I believe we simply discussed the idea with several different ideas, but I don't believe we landed and there was a motion.
Okay.
I yield, if anyone else has a different memory of such, let me know. And I take your point, Mr. Sweeney. I understand exactly what you're saying. I don't know, does anyone else have any ideas or dissenting opinions or other ideas on that? Because if not, I'm fine with that. Let me just ask about the timeline, though. If we follow this procedure, right, does that put us, are we being too ambitious to say we'll be positioned by the next meeting?
We would not be positioned
right.
by the next meeting to
Right.
consider this. The next meeting will have the rules.
Right.
And then the meeting after
September.
that, hopefully we have the MOU.
Okay.
And again, we won't have an MOU yet because then it's still going to have to get negotiated. But
Right.
we'll come back here to the board of saying, okay, this is the draft we want to go to the police department.
Okay. Let me pause there and ask Mr. Whedon a question. Where we are currently with the investigations going on, do you have I would assume that something like this, what Mr. Sweeney and others are working on, it's critical to just the bargaining back and forth of the space. So is this something that perhaps we need to look, and maybe it's not possible to expedite in some way, or can it actually hold and wait until the early fall when we can get back to it?
Well, we're operating now under the draft of these rules and guidelines, so that's what we're working on during the investigations. So it works well now,
Okay.
but of course we need to have something more solid in place, and we look forward to that. But we do have something to work with, or some guidelines to follow, and that's the drafts of these rules.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Whedon. Mr. Cooper.
I think, Mr. Sweeney, to your question about the involvement of the police chief on the task force, my notes reflect, and I believe it's the same thing that's in the minutes, that an invitation under the motion would be extended to the police chief for him or his designee to represent the police department on the task force.
Right, and
Yeah.
that was one of our concerns, because
Yes,
then you get
exactly.
through negotiating it and all like
No,
that. So
I think that's a
feedback works
legitimate
better.
concern, yes.
Okay. So perhaps there's two. Seems like there's two spaces where we need to make we need a motion. Then one to move in the way that Mr. Sweeney has detailed for us, and then number two, I guess secondly, we just need to focus on whether or not we're in agreement that we would allow our designees here to move forward here. So I'll pause there. Mr. Cooper.
I'll make a motion to approve the MOU for the purpose of distributing it for community review and comment.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Anyone second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. Focused attention, focused comment at all? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The motion passes. Thank you very much. And then next, we need to discuss exactly what the procedure will be, right? And so, Mr. Sweeney, can you just detail that one more time for us,
Yes.
what your suggestion is?
Yes. Our suggestion is that we follow the same procedure that we're following with respect to the draft rules,
Mhm.
which is to prepare an explanatory memo regarding the draft, to then circulate that and the draft MOU to the same community groups that we did with the rules, and to request their expedited written comments back. And then we thereafter set a public forum where representatives are invited to come and speak and talk for 5 minutes as a representative of their organization. And all that information will then be considered by the committee again, and will result in whatever revisions seem to be appropriate based upon that feedback, and then we will presented to the board at the next then following board meeting.
And that would be, at the end of that would be, that'd be October then? Because you would need to
Let's
come back,
see, we would,
or maybe it is.
I think it would actually be, I think we could actually do it for the September meeting.
Great.
So we will try for the September meeting if the schedule works.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay. Anyone have a great memory and can make a motion? I did take notes here. I was looking at Dr. Lewis.
I move we do that.
I'll make the motion.
Yeah.
The motion is that the committee be authorized to follow the same procedures that were explained and used for the consideration of the draft rules, which would include written distribution and solicited written comments and a public forum.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Anyone second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Any focused discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Nay. Abstention. The motion passes. Thank you very much. With that, is there anything else to discuss on this?
One rules
Yep.
issue from the committee.
Sure.
We were asked to draft a rule regarding budget and finance and the role of the director.
Mm-hmm.
We've been working on that, and we have a draft which Director Whedon has also discussed with Metro Finance.
Okay.
And we are close, and we'll present it at the next meeting for consideration of the board.
Thank you. I'll make sure that it's on the agenda. Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. And to all the other members of the board as well that have been working so diligently. Mr. Whedon, thank you to you and your staff as well for preparing all of this ahead of our meeting. Mr. Sweeney, anything else in the subcommittee update that you'd like to discuss or share?
No.
Any other members of the board that have topics to discuss here? Okay. If not, I'd like to go back. Dr. Lewis, is there anything on the NYU workshop that you'd like to share?
We had a written report to share with you, and I thought that Mr. Campbell Gooch was going to be here to do that. So I am ill-equipped to do that, but I will be happy to email it to Mr. Whedon for distribution.
Okay.
There has not been any further progress on that. The NYU police project is planning to come up with some kind of document before the end of the year, but nothing has happened yet.
Okay. Thank you. And in fact, so to allow both you and Mr. Campbell Gooch to be here together, we'll put it on the August agenda, and we just be prepared to share then. Thank you. With that, we'll move to agenda item number 11, the Metro Public Health Department MOU. Mr. Whedon and or Mr. Pickney, you have the floor.
I think Mr. Pickney will fill us in on that.
So everyone should have in front of them.
Mr. Pickney, would you mind joining us here so we can pick you up on the mic?
Everyone should have in front of them the MOU hopefully between the COB and the Public Health Department. So the short version of this is, in the course of the board's investigations, they may need some information from other metro agencies, not just from MNPD, and this MOU was drafted with me and former counsel, Mr. Dickerson, who is the attorney for Metro Public Health. So this is just a kind of a general MOU to allow public health to share documents with COB investigators. And the big concern was maintaining the confidentiality of those documents during investigations.
Thank you. I have had the opportunity to review this. I appreciate Mr. Pickney as well as Mr. Dickerson for sharing it with me. It is rather straightforward, but I do want to pause for the board to review, and if there are any questions or comments, both generally or specifically, we can pause here. Mr. Martinez, would you like a moment to?
Yes.
Yep, please feel free. In fact, let's just take 2 minutes and review, and I'll pay attention to my watch here. Would anyone like additional time? Any comments, questions? Mr. Sweeney?
Question, is there any HIPAA requirement for information that we receive from the Department of Health?
If there is, we didn't go into it for this. That can always be added if the board wants HIPAA information included.
Is that required?
We're asking you
From your experience, is the information that you have subject to HIPAA?
Autopsy reports are a matter of public record. I'm trying to imagine what are these documents that we're referring to? Can someone give me an example?
Without going into too much information, this specifically addresses Metro Animal Care and Control, which is under the Public Health Department. It was just trying to get some records from animal control. So in that particular instance, HIPAA wouldn't necessarily apply. But moving forward in other instances, we may need other records, which it may help to have some kind of language in place for a HIPAA scenario.
What sort of records related to animal care and control would we have occasion to need for?
Is that
our
like if a
work?
police dog bites somebody?
There is an ongoing investigation, so I'm trying not to give out too much information. So
It's rare. We probably won't encounter it again, but we encountered it on this occasion.
Correct.
So this is for a existing investigation?
yes, this came about as part of an existing investigation.
But I guess what would be confidential about it?
The concern just came from Metro Public Health that there would be a confidential document that would not need to be released to the public.
So this only refers to animal control documents, not to human documents at all, right?
This
There's no
particular
HIPAA.
document is strictly for animal control.
Okay, so there's no HIPAA.
That being
issue.
said, we can use language from this moving forward if another instance arises with a different Metro department.
What confidentiality provisions apply to the NACC?
That might be a question for Mr. Dickerson, but essentially the problem we're running into is that under the Tennessee Open Records Act, it's very broadly interpreted, so everything becomes public record. Mr. Dickerson and I believe Public Health and Animal Control wanted to ensure that before any documents were released, that at least they would have the opportunity to review those documents.
Ms. Ross?
We need to make some type of documentation that this document right here is for animal control. Because it gets very confusing when you think about the health department.
Yeah, but everything refers
We
to
were
animal
requesting
control.
some information on autopsies or whatever, so some clarification and title, subtitle.
Perhaps let me ask you, Mr. Pinckney, is there a way to perhaps in the header here to add something to Ms. Ross's point?
I can add that in.
Okay. Anything else? Any thoughts from Mr. Martinez?
I don't have it in front of me, but the new law that the state legislature passed this year, didn't that have some sort of confidentiality requirement from...
In relations to us?
Yeah.
I believe it did. I don't have the law in front of me to give you an exact language, but it sounds familiar. And it may just be more of a covering all of our bases to make sure.
Okay.
So the requirement of confidentiality that would be referenced here would be something that's required by law to be kept confidential. Because otherwise, how can we keep it confidential?
The concern came from the animal care and control documents just because they were given to COB automatically becoming open to the public, because they may have their own state law or other reasons for keeping those confidential.
Like I said, if it's required by state law to be
Yes.
kept confidential, then I don't think we would have a problem with
Right.
conforming to that. If it's not, I'm sure they can unilaterally make it confidential and impose that requirement on us also.
I think just the larger concern was that just because it was passed over to COB, that suddenly it lost its confidentiality, and this was just to maintain. To give animal control the right to maintain their confidentiality
As required by law.
as required by law.
Fine.
Mr. Sweeney?
Yeah, I believe the new statute says that anything that's already confidential that we receive from any other agency remains confidential.
for point of reference.
Yeah.
Thank you. With that, Mr. Pinckney, to move forward, I believe you need a motion from the board here.
Yes.
Yeah. Is anyone prepared to make that motion? Or do we have additional questions? Mr. Martinez?
If the new statute provides that, then I don't see the need to enter.
Well,
into
that's
it.
the confidentiality is just one aspect of it. There's also the provision in here that witnesses from these particular agencies would also be made available for the investigators to interview.
For our investigators?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. Which is not currently something they...
They're not required to do so currently.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So therein lies another cause or purpose for it. Mr. Cooper?
Could we add to this that the COB will maintain the confidentiality of documents as required by whatever the new code section is, under Title 38, Chapter 8, Part 3, which, as Mr. Sweeney pointed out, provides that any document provided to a community oversight board that is confidential under 10.7504 or any other law shall be treated as confidential and shall not be released to the public.
I can add that.
Yep.
Ms. Sweeney? You have something?
Sorry.
No problem. One else? Okay. So with that in mind, with the revision or addition rather that Mr. Cooper has added, do we have a motion on this? Is everyone afraid to move?
I move that we approve the MOU between the COB and the Public Health Department, acting by and through Animal Care and Control, with the amendment citing the new statute.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez, Mr. Sweeney. Focused discussion. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Nay. Abstention. Motion passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pinckney. We appreciate it. With that, we can move to number 12, the NACOL Annual Conference. Actually, one moment. We didn't forget about our fearless leader, Mr. Wheaton. Sorry, Mr. Wheaton.
That's okay.
So let's pause and extend the floor to our executive director, and then we'll pick up from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Davis. Just wanted to let the board and the community know that we've been making steady progress in our personnel and our infrastructure. We've just completed the hiring of our community liaison, Ms. Breezney Thompson, who comes to us from the County of Dixon, where she is the Chamber of Commerce. She's the director of the Chamber of Commerce there. She's also a freelance writer for the Tennessean and the local Dixon newspaper. So we believe that she will be a great asset to the Community Oversight Board. We look forward to bringing her on. She's due to start on the 5th of August, so we are definitely looking forward to that. In addition, we have remaining just 2 positions to fill. Those are the research analyst positions. We are scheduled to interview for those positions tomorrow, as a matter of fact. We have 10 candidates that are highly qualified for that position. We expect that we should be able to find 2 candidates to bring on board from those 10 within the next 2 weeks or so. So by mid-August, definitely by the end of August, the Oversight Board should be fully staffed by that time. Office space-wise, we have completed the move to our temporary space in June 17th. The permanent space is currently in the process of we're designing the current permanent space. We met with General Services just last week to take a look at how we want to have the office laid out. We made some changes, additional hallway that was necessary, major changes like that. but it looks like that we will be on schedule. Hopefully, keep our fingers crossed, to move in within about 4 months or so. That may be a little ambitious, but I'm going to keep my fingers crossed on that. We're making progress in that regard in any way.
What was the timing again? What
What's-
you said, what's the hopeful timing there?
Well, I'm hoping for about 4 months.
4 months? Okay.
Yeah, or less.
All right.
Let's say or less, but it looks like
exciting.
we're on target for that.
And we're on budget?
We are on budget. Yeah,
That's great. That's great.
hopefully
Let's just
that's,
say that on the record.
yeah,
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah.
We'll keep our fingers crossed with that as well. Office equipment. So far, we have laid down the IT network in the temporary space. Both office suites in the temporary space, we have our IT network installed. We just completed that this week, which means that we are now able to connect to our copy fax machines, and we have our desktop phones installed. We still have our mobile phones, but we now have desktop phones installed, so we're moving along in that regard as well. In addition, the IT folks, as they were installing the permanent network or temporary network, they were installing the permanent network in the permanent space, so hopefully that will be in place by the time we move in, and we won't have that delay to worry about. So the office infrastructure, definitely the temporary office infrastructure is complete at this point, and we're looking forward to having that permanent office infrastructure complete. Software-wise, we had a demonstration with Clear, which is a locating software run by LexisNexis. It's a valuable tool. I'm pretty sure we'll be utilizing that software. Another piece of software that we need to get as soon as possible is the IA Pro case management software. I've been in discussions with IT about that. It's just a matter of working things out, but there's already a contract in existence for IA Pro, I believe, with other metro departments, namely police and OPA. So I think it's a matter of how we are going to piggyback upon that contract. But we are looking forward to having that as well in the near future. Next topic, internal projects that we're working on. Mr. Pinckney continues to work on the mediation program in conjunction with Ms. Marsh and other mediation stakeholders in the community. Internship program, I've been in touch with Fisk University. They are starting their social justice and criminal justice program in the spring. The hope is that Fisk will be the location for a consortium of internship opportunities from Vanderbilt and TSU and Belmont and other local colleges can operate out of some space that Fisk University had offered to us as a permanent space that turned out to be too small. That is the goal. That looks like that will be projected towards the spring. And in addition, we are...
Mr. Whedon, can I just ask you, so the consortium, will it still be up and running even though the students from other schools won't be engaging with it? I just want to make sure.
Well, the idea is that it will be, the base will be at Fisk, the space will be at Fisk for the consortium.
Okay.
And Fisk program is not going to start until the spring. It's going to take us a little time to get the consortium agreement or the internship agreements together with the other universities as well. So we probably won't be able to have an official internship program up and running until the spring anyway. The fall semester will be starting in a month, 6 weeks at the most. So we're not going to be able to get that going by that time. So we're looking at the springtime for spring semester for the internships. But it's I think we're in place for that, with Fisk taking the lead in that consortium idea. We also have an internal project that are dealing with recognized community referral agencies. I think we spoke of this before, where agencies such as Urban League or Conexión Americas or NAACP will be able to be trained on how to intake any police complaints they may receive from members of the community that may feel more comfortable going to those agencies or don't have the ability to come downtown to make a complaint with our office. Citizens can just go to those agencies and The staff there will be trained on how to intake a complaint and pass that information on to us. So we're still working on that project as well. Of course, community outreach, our intention is to have every Friday committed towards community outreach. We hopefully we will have our, when we have our community liaison on board, we will go with that idea rapidly. That is the idea that we want to put in place rapidly. So that's going to be one of the first projects for Ms. Thompson when she comes on board, as well as getting the website up and running. Ms. Thompson is well versed at developing websites, so she's going to work in conjunction with Metro ITS to develop the COB website. And lastly, I want to talk about training. I think we have made tremendous strides in training as well. As you can see from the handout that I prepared, the investigators have completed several webinars that were presented by NACO on the NACO website. Each of those seminars were at least an hour. One was strategies for conducting officer interviews. Another was investigating search and seizure cases, assessing search and seizure cases, and also a discussion on the President's Task Force for 21st Century Policing. They've completed those 4 webinars on the NACO website. Another one is scheduled for August 8th that we'll be taking part in. That's the cognitive interview techniques. We're looking forward to that training as well. And in addition, we had several site visits over the past few weeks with the Davidson County Sheriff's Department. We went to the HDC, CDM, and MCC facilities. We also visited the Core Civic Detention Facility, and we had the pleasure of visiting the Medical Examiner's Office. Thank you, Dr. Lewis. And the investigators also participated in ride-alongs with the Metro Police Department, three-day ride-alongs. They went, each day they went to a different precinct, the East Precinct, South Precinct, and North Precinct. So they went on 3 ride-alongs, 3 days, got to visit all those different precincts at different hours to see exactly what goes on during the course of different hours and different days in those precincts. So that was a tremendous training tool for our investigators as well. In addition, you're aware that the Citizens Police Academy training needs to be conducted. Ms. Fitchard has been in discussions with Dr. Hildreth, and she'll fill us in about that after after I finish speaking here. But one thing I also want to mention is that, of course, we've had a investigation recently that that caught us all by a little bit. We had to be prepared for that. But let me say that all the stakeholders that were involved in that investigation, I can say that we have received cooperation from those stakeholders to the level that I would expect at this point in time with our organization being this young. So I'm satisfied with the cooperation from those stakeholders. I look forward to more, but so far the cooperation has been there, so that's been encouraging, and I want that to continue. So that would end my report. Ms. Fitchard will continue with the training portion with the Citizens Police Academy. She has more information about that. And if I can entertain any questions that anyone may have, please let me know.
Ms. Ross?
How many cases have been referred to you, or how many cases do we have already?
That we're investigating? We're investigating 3 cases so far, is that right?
Okay.
3, yes.
And would you say that just progress, are they all pretty much in the beginning stage, middle, or is there any that the
2
board should expect?
2 would be in the middle stages, and of course 1 is in the early stages.
Early stages.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Any additional questions before we hear from the Deputy Director here? Thank you, Mr. Wheaton. Thank you also for detailing your notes for us. Incredibly helpful and easy to follow along. Richard.
So I had a meeting.
Oh, Ms. Fisher, would you join us too? If you don't mind. So we can hear you recording.
I met with Board Member Hildreth on yesterday to discuss the Citizens Academy, which is currently slated for 14 weeks. We discussed a way to make the the 14 weeks in possibly shorter. And so her idea, the proposal is that we would videotape, or the courses would be videotaped, and some of the common courses could be combined into 3 to 5 modules. The benefit would be we all would be able to complete the coursework at one's own pace, but also having a guideline on like when to get those things completed, maybe a specific time frame, maybe a month, to get those courses completed. The coursework would then be added to ABC's e-learning system, and students, which we would be the students, the COB members, we would be enrolled into that e-learning system. She said that would create an enrollment where instructors have access to upload information as well as grade papers, update information, connect with us, just like you would do with any e-learning system. There would be a signed agreement with the COB members and the ABC that we wouldn't share the module or coursework information with anyone not enrolled in the course. The challenges with that, we talked about, could be that the scheduling could be an issue with law enforcement and the time to create those modules and those videotapes, and then also who would tape those for us. So we thought, we talked a little bit about Metro possibly doing the taping for the law enforcement, and so that, if Metro, like what we're doing here now, would tape that for us, and then we have to work out where that would happen, how that would happen. That's something that I think that she said we would have to discuss further. And that was it in regards to the e-learning system. And I think that when she spoke with her stakeholders there, they all agreed that they would be willing to do that for us. And so we're not sure exactly of the time frame, though.
Okay. That was going to be my next question. And how many on the taping side do we see? I mean, if we're doing 3 to 5 modules, but then did you already have those identified?
Well, from what we got initially from the police department in regards to their Citizens Academy, there were courses on this form that she thought could be combined in the time frames. For instance, you had 1 hour for K-9. We could probably cut that down, and they discussed K-9. They could discuss K-9 and mounted, I think there was a mounted patrol, and maybe aviation, all of those together in one module, right? And instead of having it to be a 3-hour course, it could be a 1-hour module, which I thought was great. And then there's some other things that could be done the same way. And we could take, instead of 14 courses or 14 courses, some of these courses are 2 hours. They could bring those courses down to 1 hour or an hour and a half. And I think that would give you your 3 to 5 modules.
Okay. And then, so the two big asks, one is the e-learning system, how long that would take to get interesting, something like
Yes.
that up, feasibility of that, and then the two is asking for their help right here, right?
Yes.
The people behind it's funny
Right.
you asked a favor the really strained folks. So I would think of that too, is how tight their schedule is as well. Speaking of our media team and professionals in that space. Okay, so let me pause here. Any immediate thoughts or questions here? Dr. Lewis, I see you turn around.
So there would be no in-person training at all?
I think at this point we hadn't discussed that. I'm sure that we could have a Saturday with in-person training
Okay.
and figure out which modules that we would want them to do personally. But as for the coursework that was already listed, she was talking about putting those in a e-learning format.
And this was just you and Ms. Hildreth, Dr.
Yes.
Hildreth, rather,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah,
I asked Ms. Hildreth, this came out of the executive committee, just the need to at least resurface the idea of when are we going to get these trainings accomplished and what will this look like. And so I asked her to be just a task force of one to have some type of idea to present to the board for us to consider tonight. I do think that at least with the Saturday retreat that we've been talking about, if that also, and we can come back to that as a board, that at least maybe 1 or 2 of these could be something that we, if of course a member of the police department is available, could present and train us in person. if we also, in addition to that, do the bylaws. I take your point to that, but the idea is how do we possibly get 11 different people's schedules condensed down? Mr. Cooper.
Just to add a little bit more to what our chair said, this came out of a discussion about, I think it became evident at our last meeting that it was going to be very difficult for a course that goes over 14 weeks, 1 day a week, to have a schedule where we're all going to be able to attend a required number of classes. So we were looking for alternatives. One suggestion that had come up last time was, instead of doing this kind of like a university course where it meets once a week, to do it as a short course where you concentrate it into a long weekend. And that just got us then talking about, well, are there alternatives to doing this once a week? And so Ms. Hildreth was going to work with staff to see if there was a way to come up with a strategy to make this so that it will be easier to schedule for all the board members to participate.
So I'm just concerned that that's going to place a lot of work back on Metro PD to redesign their training and to be videotaped doing it. That's my concern.
Very, very good and important point, Dr. Lewis. Mr. Martinez?
Mr. Chair, I think you mentioned something about essays in the system.
Somebody did say that.
I don't know what form of accountability or evaluation the actual in-person course has, other than maybe being present. But have you thought about what form of accountability or evaluation we would have if we did the online course? Or is it just like, I watched the video, check, right?
I'm not really sure what the law enforcement with the Citizens Academy has for us, because they haven't discussed it with us yet.
Okay.
I'm not sure if they have a question and answer or some type of graded form to show that we passed a particular class.
Okay.
I've been in contact with Captain Stevens to find out when they had they completed the schedule yet, and he said that they haven't yet. They're still working on it. And so I think as time goes on, it continues to get pushed back, and 14 weeks will, take a long time, and we'll be into the fall if we don't make some decisions on what we want to do with it.
Thank you.
Look, I'm turning my back around.
One suggestion I think we might be able to consider, I know this is a 14-week course with the Citizen Police Academy, but maybe we could select some of the subject matter that we would want to set in on, and then there would be other subject matter that could be done electronically. And that's just a suggestion, because I agree for all of the board members to attend a 14-week session. It's going to be very difficult. So I think maybe we can go through the curriculum and look at some of the things and point out some of the issues that we think would be most helpful to the committee. And we could set in on those and just have the others sort of videotaped.
Dr. Lewis?
I would be more in favor of just scheduling the 14-week session, whatever, every other Friday or whatever, and whoever can make it can make it. That face-to-face time is really important.
So I think, and thank you, Dr. Lewis, I just want to ask, so I'm clear, but even if we agreed to that, it would still have to line up with the schedule that I think you said Captain.
What Metro's created, Captain
Okay.
Stevens.
So we are sort of in a bit of a whole pattern right now, it sounds like, because even if we agree to something, if it doesn't line up to what's feasible for them, it won't.
That's correct.
Right?
That's correct. That's the way I
Okay. Mr. Sweeney?
Couple things. I think we're going to have to do more than just whoever can attend, because the charter says that we all have to go through the Citizens Police Academy. So we need to find a way by which everybody can do it. And it may be that, you know, there is a combination of, yes, set it up on the regular schedule and start running it through as the regular schedule, but to see if some of these courses can be combined. And I was wondering, and maybe Director Whedon can tell us this, do we have any flexibility in our budget where we could offer to the police as an enticement to help us to get the program formatted in a way that would be most useful to us, that we could absorb any of the costs?
I think we have some flexibility there in the training budget, yes. Of course, I don't know how much the police will require,
Right. So
but
maybe
we do have some
maybe
flexibility.
there's some option there in order to encourage a method. But, you know, since we're going to probably be having to respond to proposed reports coming from the staff here this year, we probably should figure out a way to assure that by the end of the year, we're all going to have gotten at least the core of whatever training we need to get. And so we probably don't have a lot of time to wait. We probably need to start doing something and then maybe adjust along the way.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper.
And to Mr. Sweeney's point about flexibility, you know, the charter amendment says that board members are to receive training, including the completion of the Citizen Police Academy or an equivalent training. So I think that gives us flexibility to focus on what we think is most pertinent to our function.
And
So, yeah, Ms.
And I can ask Captain Stevens if they have any of this already pre-recorded. They could have. I mean, we don't know. Like when they're doing their own trainings, they could have some of this curriculum already pre-recorded that would be available to us.
Ms. Fitchard, I'd like to offer an idea, and then I'd like to hear the board's position on this. So I understand that you're in conversation with the captain, and I thought perhaps to Chief Turner's point that perhaps we do need to look at what an equivalent training would be. I think we certainly need a member of the board from law enforcement to be in that discussion to talk about what that would look like, but also likely another member of the board, either from the community or elsewhere, to also think about the community elements of it when we think about the training. This is something that I would like for us to have at least some understanding of how we're going to move forward, to Mr. Sweeney's point, by the next board meeting. I think we're running out of months in 2019 quickly, and certainly have to think about schedules as well. So is there anyone that would like to volunteer to work? And this would really just be to connect with Mrs. Fitchard. I know that Dr. Lewis, not Dr. Lewis, sorry, Dr. Lewis, Dr. Hildreth has already raised her hand to say if she can be helpful in the training portion of our work here. She would like to. But is there anyone else that has an interest in this? If nothing else, and just, if you don't mind me borrowing, looking through this sheet to figure out what is absolutely indispensable to our function as a board here. And I know I'm pointing towards you, Chief Turner, but I can point this way too.
I'll volunteer to do that.
I'll help with it also.
Okay, very great. We will take all the talent we have around this table, Ms. Marsh and Chief Turner. And if anyone else has an interest in this, please reach out. But if you, Mrs. Fitchard, would work with the three of those members, that would be great. And then by our August board meeting, if we could have just a plan in place of what your recommendation is to the board, that would be great. Are there any thoughts or even other ideas here? I don't want to leave this topic unless we all feel comfortable with it moving forward this way. Okay. Not, thank you very much. Mrs. Fitchard, anything else?
Yeah, there was one other thing that Dr. Hildreth brought up, and that was monthly in-service training. She wanted you guys to think about monthly in-service training, that each person would dedicate a few hours a month maybe on a Saturday, that the board would come and do some training. That training would be where we would volunteer to train on topics that you may already know, maybe like informed trauma, other law enforcement issues, criminal justice issues, or any behavioral health issues.
And who would offer the trainings?
She said that we could, well, whoever is capable of doing that training, or also like maybe invite some community groups in to do some training.
Something to consider.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Let's, I think, table that for August, and once this group has been able to meet and engage, unless there's any initial thoughts or comments there. All right. Thank you, Mrs. Smith. I appreciate it. Thank you. We'll move on to agenda item number 12 here, the NACO Annual Conference. In front of you, you have the schedule for the conference is coming up in the month of September. Just two things that I want to make sure that we accomplish here in this space. One, and someone please feel free to correct your chair if I'm wrong here, but I believe that until we have the budget and finance rule in place, we do need to vote to approve the charges related to our staff attending. Am I correct about that, or did we return to that? Because I didn't know, we did discuss a certain threshold and all those things, but I thought where we landed was that a rule will be drafted. Anyone have thoughts on that? No? Okay. Mr. Wheaton, let me ask you, what is your understanding of where we landed on that? Are you awaiting a motion from the board on this?
I'm awaiting a motion from the board and also awaiting a departmental credit card to make a purchase. But, we have secured the early bird rate. Early bird was due to expire on the 26th of July, but we've secured the early bird rate. I've been in touch with NACO, so that's accomplished. My understanding is that we were going to send the 9 staff members, and was it 1 member of the board? So it's number 10. So if you see my notes, I've attached a quick outline of the expenditures for the conference in Detroit, which comes within the budget. We prepared the budget in mind that NACO would be the major expenditure for training, and this comes within the training budget for NACO.
Okay. Mr. Sweeney.
Just one question. 9 staff members.
Yes.
That includes everyone, including your administrative assistant?
No, not the administrative assistant.
So with that, I can get your motion maybe, but I can't get your credit card. But please let me know at the next meeting if you fail to have one, and then perhaps we can speak to some of our supporters to figure out what that is. I'd like to understand why it's taking so long, too. It seems like it's been a while.
Yes.
So I'll work with you on that. With that, is there a motion to approve the expenditures before us here for the NACO conference to include non-members of the COB staff and that of one member of the COB, the board? Is there a motion there?
So moved.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. Anyone second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Focused discussion. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Nay. Abstentions, rather. The motion carries. Thank you very much. And this is mid to late September. I believe that Dr. Hildreth said that she plans to attend for a few days, 1 or 2 days over the weekend herself on her own accord. I myself might be in the area for business, so if I can, then I'll purchase a day just so that I can participate. And on my own, I'll certainly come back to the board with that. Mr. Sweeney.
Yes. This NACO meeting will be on the date when we have a board meeting set, on the 25th. So do we need to move the date of our board meeting in order to address that?
Well, that's a very good point. I think that we certainly should. We'll be without Mr. Whedon and our fantastic, I don't know how many of y'all back there, but I don't want to run this meeting without you. I think that makes perfect sense. Perhaps, I guess the board would need to review their calendars We'd also have to consider the schedule of our team here that assists and supports us with AV and tech. So let me connect on all those chords. I'll connect with Mr. Weed and also look at the calendar. I believe we have that calendar of metro events taking place so that we don't overcrowd a date. And then I'll send out a few options the same way we did before. Okay. Thank you for that flag. With that, the last thing on number 12 is just to talk about who from the board will attend. There are, I'm open if anyone wants to recommend, nominate and volunteer themselves. Mr. Campbell Gooch has volunteered to attend. I thank him for that. I did say I would be opening this up to the board. I think it's important that we all consider and participate in these things, and he did have the opportunity to attend the New York workshop, which in no way precludes him from participating in Detroit. But I'd like to open it up to the board. Is there anyone that has interest in attending the NACO conference? Has the schedule and opportunities the 22nd through the 26th, so you certainly need to fly out at least by that morning of that Sunday, and you'd be gone through that Thursday, at least.
And this would require you to write a report when you come back?
An essay. An essay.
You could just pass it off on someone else.
Ms. Ross. Ms. Ross, thank you. Absolutely. Anyone else interested? Ms. Ross is interested and willing to do the writing. You heard that after. Thank you, Ms. Ross. With that, so I did tell Mr. Campbell Gooch that, but I think it is important we have full space. So do we have a motion here for Ms. Ross?
So moved.
Thank you. Anyone second? Thank you, Mr.
Wait. Point of order. Don't we have a motion already on the floor? Did we already vote on that? We voted on that. Sorry. I had it.
No, thank you, though. Keep me in line there. I appreciate it. We have a seconded by Mr. Cooper. Focused discussion. All those in favor of Mr. Ross attending and representing the Community Oversight Board at the 2019 NACO conference, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? The motion passes. Thank you, Ms. Ross. We appreciate that and your service in that area. Next is the COB personnel and office naming. I want to pause a bit here and actually ask either or Mr. Wheaton and Mrs. Fitchard to address the board in this space. This is an idea that was brought to my attention during my tour of the office space, and I didn't have an opportunity to bring this before the board in June, so we're talking about it now.
Ms. Fisher will address that.
Sure. Come on up, Ms. Fitchard.
So.
Oh, you got to come to the mic.
Come on back.
Okay.
Come on back.
So recently, especially when we had the issue around the 4th of July, we had a lot of input from the media when they came in, and they were asking us questions in regards to who we are, what we do. They were a little bit confused about the board's function and then the staff's function. And so I had a discussion with Mr. Whedon and also with Mr. Pinkley in regards to how we could possibly separate ourselves with a different name, but still, it would still encompass what we do and, with the board as well. And taking maybe the name and kind of, instead of it being the COB, and we all are called the COB, that the office could be called maybe the Office of the COB or the Nashville Community Oversight Board or some type of derivative of that. To make a distinction that these are what we do, the daily functions of the office is separate from the board. And we talked a little bit in regards to how the Arts Commission had done that, and they're just Metro Arts instead of the Metro Arts Commission. Of course, our name is a little longer than that. So, and so I wanted to bring that today so that we could discuss choosing some type of deviation from the name, and Todd has been looking into that legally for us, and that's why we're here about
And
that.
has some options for us as well.
Well, so according
you got to find a mic. And then there may be questions also, I'm sure, from the board on this too. I'd like to talk what we need to amend if we do this to the bylaws or some other space. I don't know if you speak to that, but Mr. Pinckney.
So from the legal aspect, we need to stick to whatever variation or what the name is in the charter. Luckily, that gives us a lot of options because the name in the charter is incredibly lengthy. So our official name is the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County Community Oversight Board. So we would just need to use some variation of that, whether it would be to follow like arts commissions. We could be just the Metro Community Oversight would be the name for the staff, as opposed to, that way it would deviate us from the board specifically. That way people who called our office wouldn't necessarily be looking for board members thinking that they called the Metro Nashville Community Oversight Board. Sure. They would expect to speak to staff because it doesn't have the word board in the title.
The Metro Community Oversight, was that the last one?
So like Metro Arts Commission, that's their commission's name, but also their office refers to themselves as Metro Arts, just to kind of draw a distinction between themselves and the commission.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Pinckney. If you could just stay there. Any questions, thoughts? Anyone feel one way or the other? Agree the need for it? Mr. Martinez?
Can you state the whole name again?
Yeah, it's in the chart. It's the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County Community Oversight Board.
Dr. Lewis?
I have found it to be extremely confusing to be referring to all of us as the same thing too, so I would definitely be in favor of doing this and calling it, I don't know, whatever you want to call yourselves, Office of Community Oversight, or that's maybe a little broad sounding, but whatever you guys think.
Dr. Mr. Cooper, I thought you returned. Sorry. Mr. Martinez?
And you proposed Metro Community Oversight?
I'm not necessarily proposing anything, just a couple of suggestions.
It would be legal.
Nashville Community Oversight, Metro Nashville Community Oversight, something along those kind of variations. It just needs to include the words that are actually in the official name that's in the charter.
Any recommendations from the board? We'll give our wordsmith a moment. That's Mr. Martinez.
I like Metro Community Oversight.
Our other wordsmith.
Yeah, you might say that.
I think it's fine to use a shortened version, for easy reference, but I think that we should use the Community Oversight Board because that's really who we are, just like the Human Rights Commission. And in all the documents that we've done, we've made a distinction between the board and the staff, and we've used the word COB to be the broader organization. So I think that it would be fine for us as a shorthand version to call us Nashville Community Oversight or the Office of the Nashville Community Oversight Board or something like that. But I don't think that we should give a new name to the staff. I think we should call the staff, and that's what they do for the Human Rights Commission, and you look at their regulations, and they do it that way. So, I mean, a shortened version for ease of reference, if people find this, that's fine. Makes sense. But I wouldn't change any of the rules of the bylaws and refer to the organization differently than officials, COB, and then board and staff.
Rules and bylaws remain in the same language that they currently exist. And for the short form is what we're discussing for tonight. Okay. And that was your understanding as well, Mr. Pinckney,
Yes.
Mrs. Fisher. Thank you. Mr. Martinez, were you saying something? You hurry up and write.
Do we need a motion?
Yeah.
Dr. Lewis.
Well, I'll make a motion that the staff refer to themselves, and we'll refer to them as the Metro Nashville Community Oversight.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis.
Put that right out there.
Thank you. Anyone? Can you say that language in Metro Nashville Community Oversight?
That's correct.
Okay. The Metro Nashville Community Oversight.
I like that.
Office.
Metro COB.
We have a motion on the table. Anyone second? Miss.
I propose Metro COB.
Okay.
Take out Nashville.
One moment. We have the motion on the floor. I think I have to, in proper order, I have to ask, does anyone
I think the
second?
motion's dead.
If no one seconds, then,
It's dead.
yeah, it's dead. Okay, do you ready?
My motion is dead.
Okay.
I'll second it for discussion.
That's okay. We can just proceed.
It's okay,
And my
Ms.
feelings
Long.
aren't hurt.
Okay, but if she's withdrawing her motion, it's fine. Ms. Ross, can you say your recommendation again there?
I make a motion that we call it Metro Community Oversight Board.
Metro Community Oversight Board. No, so you wouldn't be called board, we're talking about the staff.
Staff, I'm sorry, staff.
Metro
Thank you.
Community Oversight staff. Anyone second?
I don't want to ask staff on that. I don't want to ask staff. Metro Community Oversight
One
Board.
moment, Mr. Whedon, hold on one moment. Does anyone second?
What is the motion?
Metro Community Oversight Board. Not, yeah.
Well, it couldn't be called board, so the language needs to relate to the staff itself,
Okay.
right? So it
We have
can't.
Metro Social Services or Metro COB. Why can it not be Metro COB? It's an office. Like Metro Social
I think
Services.
so,
Metro
but I think if we use the language of board, we still run into the prickliness of people being confused about whether or not they're engaging with the board when they call the office, at least from
What
what
do
I'm
we want to be
understanding.
staff?
Yeah. So it seems like that motion
Okay.
dies out. Let me pause here for that, and if someone else wants to make a new motion, I'll entertain first Mr. Whedon's statement before we'll take
Well,
another.
let me just add that the members of the staff did take a survey and a poll of what we wanted to rename ourselves.
Sure.
I think, Ms. Pitcher, did you have the results of that survey?
Yes. The Metro Nashville Community Oversight.
Metro Nashville.
Isn't that what I said?
Yeah, but
I didn't want to say anything.
That's exactly what you said.
Genius.
Metro Nashville
So-
Community Oversight Office.
Yes, let me go to Mr. Martinez first, and then I'll come back to you. Ms. Ross.
So since Metro, so it seems like Metro Arts just calls themselves Metro Arts. Could we just shorten it to Metro Community Oversight? I mean, there's no other city that we're talking about.
Just Metro Community Oversight. Is there a motion on the table?
I'll move for that one.
Metro Community Oversight. Mr. Sweeney it's moved. Anyone second?
Second.
Mr. Martinez. Any focused discussion? Dr. Lewis.
I know in the Rules Committee, we spent about 15 minutes talking about this one day. But I really feel like it should just stay Metro Nashville, just sort of in order to be in line with Metro Nashville PD. And I know Ms. Ross is going to disagree with me.
And it's okay if we have different votes here. That's okay. Ms. Ross.
I disagree with adding Nashville because it seems like we're limiting ourselves to just Nashville, Davidson County area, which it should be Davidson County in there because you got Goodlettsville, Berry Hill, and all those other that patrol the streets in Nashville. So I want to leave. I would like to see Nashville left out.
Okay. Thank you. Any additional focused discussion here? Okay, let's take a vote here.
What's the motion?
So the motion.
Yeah,
on the-
did someone make the motion?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Been seconded.
Mr. Sweeney did for Metro Community Oversight. Mr. Martinez second. We're in the midst of focused discussion here. I'm ready to take a vote. All those in favor, please. And in fact, let's do if you could raise your hand for me, or at least I can do a call
Do a
vote if I
roll
need
call.
to. But all those in favor, please say aye.
Did you have something to say?
Or raise aye. Let me do this way. Dr. Lewis, I'm doing a call vote.
Well,
here.
I'm going to go ahead and vote no, just
Nay,
to
okay.
die on a hill.
That's okay. Thank you. Chief Turner. Yay, nay.
Let me
or-
make sure that I understand what the
It's the Metro Community Oversight. It's the name.
Okay, the Metro Community Oversight. Should we add the word office? Community Oversight Office?
Right.
That way,
We can't.
Official title.
Yeah.
It's got to be an official.
Something
Okay.
that comes from the official name that's in
but that would
You can only use
distinguish
those words.
the staff and office from the board. Is that correct?
It would, and I spoke to Mr. Dickerson about this, and he said we'd have to stick to what the language in the charter. So some variation of that long title.
Okay, so the Metro Community Oversight.
Yes.
Okay.
Yea or nay? Abstain?
I'll vote for that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Ross?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Sweeney?
Yes.
Mr. Cooper?
Yes.
Mr. Martinez?
Yes.
Ms. Marsh? Thank you. I don't need to break a tie, so the motion passes 5-2. The name is Metro Community Oversight. Thank you very much, Ms. Fitchett and Mr. Pickney. Number 14 here is the COB Executive Board elections, and for that, I'd like to refer us to, I believe I'm correct about this, but pursuant to our bylaws, Article 8, Section 4, says that the chair shall appoint a nominating committee to extend a recommendation of those to serve on the executive committee. And so I'm pausing here to note also that the date actually states that I believe this should have for their recommendations to be ready by June 22nd here. I'm paraphrasing a bit because I don't have it in front of me. As the chair, thank you very much. Thank you. So the nominating committee will recommend board members for the officer roles. The nominating committee shall be appointed by the chair of the board and shall begin its deliberations by June 22nd of each calendar year. The nominating committee will consider, along with other relevant candidate criteria, the following factors as applicable to potential nominees. And among those are 5 criteria: your interest, your attendance in board meetings, the participation in the mission of the board, and then the responsiveness to the staff of the board. So, as chair, this is how thank you, Mr. Cooper. I'd like to proceed with appointing. I'd like to have 3 members on this nominating committee. I would prefer there be representation from essentially our 3 segments of our board and how we're constituted here. There was talk that, of course, I could sit on that nominating committee. I personally am not comfortable with that as your chair. I prefer not to be on that committee. But before we get to the idea of who will participate in it, and I would just like to detail out what I have in mind here, is that the nominating committee would, number one, if you have a nomination that you would like, either self-nomination or someone else on the board, that you would send that, email it to Mr. Wheaton within the next week. You have a week to send that in. So if I decide to nominate person X on the board for said position, I email that directly to Mr. Wheaton with no one else CC'd. Mr. Wheaton will then bring all of those nominations to the nominating, will first reach out to each member that has been nominated. So let's say I've been nominated for a position, Mr. Wheaton will call me and say, do you accept this nomination? You have the opportunity to decline or accept. And then those that have accepted will be shared with the nominating committee so that they can then look at all of these criteria, which means as well that I've asked Mr. Wheaton if he will bring attendance as well from each one of our board members so that they can consider that as well. And then that slate of candidates will be brought to our next meeting for us to then review and vote on. Ideally, all of this will be prepared and ready for us by the time we meet in August, is the plan for that. It allows each one of us, first of all, to step back, to take a breath, and look at how we are at the halfway point of our service here to the city. I encourage everyone to just think about that the leaders that we have currently in place were in those roles to stand us up, that perhaps we are now in a new chapter, a new space, and that's exciting, right? Or perhaps we, Martinez is laughing, but also if we see that it's open to also think about yourself in these spaces. I just don't want anyone to look at, well, because I haven't served in this space, perhaps I can't. There's always an opportunity, I think, for each one of us to serve. We've seen that in a myriad of ways. And so that's where we are. We have until next Tuesday to send in our nominations, whether that's self-nomination or otherwise. And then, Mr. Wheaton, if you wouldn't mind then taking the remaining portion of the week to just reach out to the board members to see if they accept or decline on those nominations so that the nominating committee can meet the following week. That will be great. With that, do we have any volunteers or anyone that is interested in serving on the nominating committee? It says I can certainly appoint, but I love it when people volunteer. Dr. Lewis, you're making a face. Do you have a question?
If people are going to self-nominate or submit nominations to Mr. Whedon, why do we need a nominating committee other than it's in the bylaws?
Yeah, it's in the bylaws, but they are also looking at the criteria that's set forth in the bylaws, right? So there could be someone who has been nominated for a role, but does not meet said 5 elements of the criteria. The nominating committee will come back to us with, and I would expect a report of such explain if someone has been removed for reason. It shouldn't be done, in a closed space where you don't understand why. But that's my understanding. I yield to other members of bylaws and creation thing. Mr. Cooper.
As I would understand, given that we are governed by Robert's rules, this nominating committee would come back with would consider all the nominations, all the suggestions it's received, would consider their own choices, and then come back with a recommended slate for each office that to present to the board. That would then be put before the board, and for each position the floor would then be opened if there were other nominations that were to be made, and then the board would vote on each position. So they're coming up with a slate of suggested candidates, which of course does not prevent other people from being nominated at the meeting.
Okay, thank you. It's a slate, but it's not set in stone.
Yeah. Very good. So anyone, Ms. Marge?
So is it correct to assume that the members on that nominating committee would not be eligible to be on the executive?
It's a very good question. No, it wouldn't preclude them because so my hope is the mix of those that are attending, right, that one, if you're on the nominating committee, that when it comes around we're reviewing your candidacy, sufficiency of your candidacy, that you wouldn't have a voice or a vote in that space. Mr. Wheaton or a member of his team will be participating and attending that as well to guide the conversation. So just because you're a part of it doesn't mean anything. Yeah. Any volunteers, anyone interested in participating on the nominating committee? Not. So I will say that Mr. Campbell Gooch in his ever-present energy and space, God love him, I appreciate him, I really do. He said he certainly was willing to participate. In fact, he raised his hand when I expressed as chair that I did not think it was appropriate for me to be a member of the nominating committee. And so he would represent a member of the community in that respect. And so, so we do have one member, and I do appoint him to that space, but I welcome others as well. I would certainly like us to think about, this is quite frankly, a really great opportunity to serve in a very purposeful, but it's going to be quite brief. I think this is only just one meeting that it would take for you to get through these nominations and move forward. So, Ms. March? Thank you, Ms. March. Anyone else interested in participating? And so with that, it would be Mr. Campbell Gooch, Ms. March. It would be great if we had perhaps just one more, but I actually said 2. I believe I said 2 or 3. So we'll leave it there. And if anyone else has expressed interest, just reach out before the end of next week. Thank you. I'm going to move to our second to last agenda item. It's our public comment schedule. And so we have done a wonderful job coming together here with just the basic tenet skeleton of our board and the components of it. I think we are, and I agree with you, Mr. Sweeney, I appreciate you raising this point by email, that we are ready to open up the public comment section of our meeting. I propose that we do that starting next month, and I'd like to just detail out for you all the procedure that I have in mind here. I'd like to open up 5 spots for public comment, 2 minutes each. 3 of those available for sign up online, starting 1 week before the meeting, and so we would provide the general general Metro Community Oversight email address, and then 2 spots would remain open, or the remainder of the spots open at 30 minutes prior to the opening of our board meeting. The public comment would take place at the end of our meeting to allow members of Mr. Whedon's staff to consult with members of the public to ensure there's no potential conflict with any ongoing investigation. And also, and Mr. Campbell Gooch raised very eloquently, to ensure that we as a board are able to receive the comments that are offered in a very thoughtful way as well. We would, I as the chair, according to the bylaws, would be able to extend that time if necessary, but we would offer guidelines, very quick and thoughtful guidelines to members of the public to ensure that they are able to get their points across and that we are able to receive them thoughtfully. This will start, I said, August meeting, COB staff, yep. I think those are the highlight points. I want to pause there and take any questions or thoughts or anything anyone thinks I left out. Are we all in agreement that we should open up the public comment? I think it was certainly a good time and, quite frankly, a great deal of interest in the community as well. And then perhaps if we see that we are ready and there's an outpouring of interest, we'll open it up beyond the 5. But I assume that 5 slots was a good way to begin in our space. Does that work for everyone? Okay. All right. And so I'll work with Mr. Whedon and others on the kind of sign-up sheet just to make sure it is appropriate, which I'm sure it will be. Thanks, everyone. Any new business? No? Smart. Okay. Well, I think there's no additional announcements I have. I appreciate everyone communicating. If they were running behind, going to be late, I appreciate it. Congratulations. Also, Mr. Whedon, to you and your staff, you're almost whole, so congrats there. We look forward to meeting the newest member next meeting as well. With that, I'll accept the motion to adjourn. Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Anyone second?
Second.
Thank you, Chief Turner. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Nay. Abstention. The motion passes. We adjourn at 5:56. Thank you very much.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.